Hello and welcome to episode 62 of the Yes You Coaching podcast. I'm your host, Anna Manning, and today we're going to talk about help. My brain's gone blank. So, I wanted to do this episode because it's something that I coach on fairly frequently. And I don't know whether it's something that people necessarily share with each other because usually when somebody tells me, oh, I have this thing where my brain goes completely blank or, um, I kind of go offline or like I'm a rabbit in the headlights and I can't breathe and I can't talk. Usually when people share it with me, they share it as if it's this extremely strange phenomenon that I might never have heard of or might not know anything about. And I wonder whether this is something which we all manage in one way or another, but in on the quiet, even though we have really familiar terms which describe this. Like you might hear somebody say, "Oh, my brain's gone blank." Right? That's a very common term and one thing we all understand. You might hear somebody say, "I was like a rabbit in the headlights." Right? Same kind of thing. Or you might hear somebody say, "Oh, I had brain freeze." Not like when they ate too much ice cream, but what they're describing is like their brain pausing, going blank, or being like a rabbit in the headlights. And I think that is really easily understood by all of us because I think it's something that happens to all of us. So it's often described to me as, oh, it's this awful thing that happens to me, in kind of either a concerned way or in a way that makes me think perhaps people think this just happens to them and it's not, and they don't actually know that it's like a common phenomenon that happens probably to everyone. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. I also want to share like a little bit of the coaching that I do with people around this issue because I coach on it fairly frequently. Because I'm a confidence coach, one of the things that comes up is, a moment of panic, a moment when my brain's gone blank, and the way that people find that really difficult to deal with. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Before we do that, I just wanted to let you know that I have a free masterclass coming up in October. I think it's Thursday, the 19th of October in the evening. And either you can come to that live or you can just put your name down on the form and you'll get the replay. And that is a class that I've created to help you think about how to speak up more at work. So I did that podcast a little while back. What was it called? Why speaking up is hard and what to do about it. And loads of people listened to that episode, more than normal. And quite a few people got in touch with me to say, that's something that I struggle with. So I was like, okay, let me like go a little bit further into what we do in that podcast and actually create a class where people can come and learn and take something away, because I truly believe that you're probably one of the good guys, and we need the good guys to be able to say the things that are in their heads, because let's face it, the bad guys are saying that. So go to the link in the show notes and sign up free for that class. But without further ado, let's get to what we're going to today. So my brain has gone blank. And this actually happened to me this week. So this fresh in my mind too. So this week I was filming. I'm having some of the stuff that I teach, the stuff on confidence that I teach and I share with you here. I'm having some of that on a platform, and it's a special platform where it's shared with businesses and organizations all over the world so that their staff can learn, can get trained by me and some of the work that I do. And I thought that was really exciting because I want to share some of this stuff that I do more widely. But I was in this scenario where I'm in this cool, like old warehouse type building in East London. And there are, I don't know why I wasn't expecting this, but there are like 6 guys, all men actually, and then a couple of women as well who were kind of making the day run smoothly and watching. But all of the sort of techie people were men, and everyone was lovely. But imagine you're like sat there in a chair and there's this huge like lighting thing above your head, and there's a microphone above your head. So they're like, don't stand up suddenly, hit yourself on the microphone. You're rigged up with the microphone yourself. There's a guy sitting and asking you questions. There is somebody with a camera on some sort of, I don't know, like slidey thing. I'm sure there is a professional word for that, but I have no idea what it is. Then there's people on laptops, like looking at what they get. And there's somebody with a sound monitor. And then there's a helicopter flying overhead. So we keep having to stop, right? It's a pretty weird, unless you're used to that kind of thing and that's your everyday. It was a pretty weird setup for me. And it was outside my comfort zone, right? And there was one moment after this helicopter had been flying over for, I don't know, 5 minutes or something, where we had to pause. And then I started one of my videos by, I must have said, yeah, or right, or something. And they were like, yeah, do it again, but don't say that. And I was like, okay. And then my brain went completely blank. And I was like, I don't even know what I was talking about. And because I know this is a thing that happens, I didn't stress myself out about it. I literally, where there are 6 people looking at me with all their equipment, I looked down to one side, I relaxed my shoulders, I took a deep breath in and out. I told myself I could do it. I lifted my head back up and I started talking. Now, no one in that room had anything to say about that. They were just like, yep, great. Yeah, that's it. We got what we needed. Thanks very much. So I had a moment in that whole thing with 6 people watching me where my brain went, I would say, completely blank. But because I knew how to handle it, I didn't like stay offline and start panicking or think that it was a terrible thing that happened. I was able to sort of move through it, do what I needed to do, and then get back on with what I was trying to do. And I thought, right, there's loads of people that are having this experience of their brain going blank. It's happening all the time, all over the place, in every workplace up and down the country and up and down the world. Because I know we have people who listen to this podcast from a range of countries all over the world. So shout out to our international audience. It's lovely to have you with us. So it isn't something which just you are experiencing if you're experiencing this. And it's not a medical thing that I'm talking about today. So with a caveat that there are, like, for instance, there's a type of epilepsy where you can have an absence, and that is something where you're kind of offline, you're unavailable. But I'm not talking about that kind of thing here. What I'm talking about is this common phenomenon that we experience where your brain just goes blank. You might experience some panic around that, and then you're kind of able to get back on with what you're doing. So we're not talking about like something that is a health issue or like a serious disruption caused by like a neurodegenerative condition or a psychiatric disorder, something like that. We're talking about that common thing, that brain going blank. So I looked at some of the research for this, and it was basically saying that it involves a lack of conscious awareness. And it says this phenomenon occurs when attention and perception stop working together. So, in other words, attention is not grabbing any inputs for your conscious awareness to do something with. And your mind is nowhere rather than elsewhere. So, it's not just when your mind's wandering and you're like, mind's elsewhere. And what the research seems to sort of conclude is that it's a very common mental state, even though actually what they said was that it's pretty tricky to measure. And what they seem to, I mean, there's a lot of different strands in this research, and I went down a bit of a rabbit hole with it. But to be honest, all we really need to know is that it's a common neurocognitive phenomenon. Right? When your mind goes blank, it's a common neurocognitive phenomenon. And what that means is it's something that happens all the time to loads of people. So it can occur just spontaneously with no particular reason that you can notice, or it can happen when your brain feels like really overloaded, or it can happen, and the most of the time when I'm coaching on it, the reason that it's seems to be happening, or at least the situation that it seems to be happening in, is that the person's in some sort of either challenge situation or potentially exposing situation or pressurized situation. So let's say people are looking at you, you might be trying to give people information, you might be trying to present something, you might be speaking or being, let's say, put on the spot and being asked to answer a question, you might be in an interview, something like that. And that when I think of the times when my mind's gone really blank, that's what it has been for me. So I think there's a few things that I want to go through today that might just help you. And the first thing is just recognizing that this is a common thing, that it probably happens to everyone, that it's a part of being human. So if it's unavoidable and normal and not necessarily a big problem, what is like, why is it such a big deal? Why does it feel like a big deal? And why would it be something that, I would coach people on? And I think the reason is because what happens when, let's use my example. I'm in that filming scenario and my mind goes blank. Well, what I often see with clients is that at that moment, the panic button is almost pushed because they're thinking, "Oh, my mind's gone blank. Like these people are looking at me, or I can't answer, or I've lost my train of thought." And in a way, that is a response to a stress situation, right? Your mind going blank. But what we can tend to do is then pile on the pressure because the mind blank has happened. So let's say you already might be feeling a bit of stress, you already might be feeling a bit of pressure because this mind blank thing has happened. But then what if you're piling on the pressure by thinking, oh God, like this is awful, this shouldn't be happening, everyone's looking at me, right? It makes it even worse. It makes it even worse. And as your sort of stress response increases, so does the impact that that's having on your brain, on your cognitive function, on your cognitive function. So at that moment, your brain is really thinking, this is extremely like threatening situation, which I must respond to by giving you loads of adrenaline and cortisol and, helping you to fight, flight, or fight, fight, flight, whatever that is. Anyway, my brain went blank. Fight, flight. There you go. There is a perfect example of that happening. But what if that isn't even a problem, right? You know what I mean? Because I just couldn't remember fight, flight, or freeze, I could have increased the pressure on myself by thinking, oh my God, I'm doing a podcast. How embarrassing. I'm supposed to know all about this. And I can't even remember fight, flight, or freeze. What the hell is wrong with me? Everyone's going to think I'm incompetent and stop listening to this podcast. Right? I could think all that. And imagine how much more stressed I would be. If I'd gone there in my mind, I probably wouldn't have remembered it 10 seconds later, as I just did. So if you're in the situation and your brain goes blank, just try and key into what happens next. And if you can remember a really specific example of when this happened to you, like go back into the scene in your mind and see if you can replay it in your mind and watch yourself having that brain blank moment. And then what happens next? Freeze frame it and then say, what happens next? Did I start going off on one in my mind thinking, oh God, this is terrible. Can't remember what I'm saying. Oh no, this always happens. Or something else. And if it's the first thing, if you kind of are going off on one in your own mind, like, what if this happens again? This always happens to me. This is terrible. Everyone's going to think I'm incompetent. How did that make you feel? I'm just having a sip of water because I've got a bit of a cold this week. So yeah, you're in this situation, you have the brain blank, and then you like start piling on the pressure. Now imagine if you had that brain blank moment and everybody else in the meeting was like, "We think you're incompetent. This should not be happening to you." Oh my gosh, you'd be so much more stressed. I think your brain would stay blank for about 5 minutes. And I hope no one's doing that to you. I'd say they're probably not. Maybe they are, but I hope they're not. But if that's happening inside your own mind, then it could be inadvertently just making a little bit worse. So I just want you to think about what your no, let me say it like this. Just recognize that it's part of being human and just notice if you're putting the pressure on after it happens by like saying, it's going to happen to me every time and this always happens and everyone's going to think I'm incompetent, because that's actually going to make it worse and it's probably going to make it more drawn out. And that comes to my second sort of tip, which is check what you're making it mean, the fact that this happens. And to be honest, it's pretty much linked to the first point. But what might happen and what does happen and can happen for my clients is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the fact that this brain blank moment is happening can lead people to question their ability. And maybe then they start to think, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. I can't do this aspect of my job. Maybe I'm not up to it. Maybe I shouldn't be here. And all of that stuff starts to happen. So, yeah, you have a brain blank in a meeting, but that could mean nothing to you. It could be like, oh, I had a brain blank in a meeting, then I just carried on, it was fine. It could mean nothing. Or you could make it mean all sorts of things. You could make it mean, oh, I'm not good enough at my job. I'm not confident enough to do this. Like, people think I'm rubbish at my job. They're going to question my capability. All of that could happen. You could make this brain blank mean all sorts of things if you wanted to. And let's face it, like our brains are very good at coming up with a little theory about what something might mean in order to scare the crap out of us. Our brains are great at that. So just watch whether yours is actually doing that, because all it means is that you're a normal human with a normal brain having a brain blank. That's the facts. The rest of it is just stuff that your brain's probably making up. And it possibly isn't even true. But once you think all that stuff, it's going to pile on the pressure. And the problem with piling on the pressure, being like, oh, maybe I'm not up to it, maybe I can't do it, maybe this means that I'm rubbish at my job, or, I'm just not cut out for presenting, etc. When you're thinking all that, you're like inadvertently raising the stakes and actually making it, I would say, more likely to happen again in the future. So when we're thinking about like performance environments, so I'm presenting, I'm on a stage, I am, giving an update to a meeting, something like that, the more you make that mean, oh dear, I'm rubbish, etc., the worse probably that it's going to be the next time. So basically, the message is this: it's normal, cut yourself some slack, give yourself a break. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything apart from the fact that it just happened. Okay? So I'm going to recommend a couple of things. One for before the event, and then second for if it actually happens. So before, let's say you think, well, this does often happen to me, so I can pretty much predict that it probably is going to happen again. And I know what my triggers are. So I know that it's in a certain situation where this happens. So before you go into that situation, I don't want you to not think about it. So we think, oh, don't think about it. Don't think about it. That's going to make it easier. But uh, that's not going to be my recommendation. I recommend that you actually actively think about it and you decide how you want to handle it ahead of time. So let's say, like, if X happens, then Y. Like, if if a brain blank occurs during this presentation, then what? Like, how do you want to handle it? What needs to happen for you in order for you to get the ultimate result that you want, which is probably just to, carry on with your presentation or give your information, whatever. So I know that for me, if a brain blank happens, then I will not give myself a hard time. I might actually refer to it. So you might not do this, but I might actually say, oh, brain blank moment. Anyone else have those? Right. So that might be part of what I do to kind of normalize it. I might take a pause. I might take a breath and then carry on. Or in another situation, I might say, now, where was I? Was anybody listening? And then maybe somebody would give me like the thread of where I was and I could pick it up and carry on. So I don't want to ignore the fact that it might happen before the event. I want to actively decide how I want to handle it if it happens. And the reason that I find this useful to kind of walk through this with clients and with myself is that in that moment, you don't want to having to be making decisions about how you're going to handle it because there's way too much going on for you already. You want to decide ahead of time. You want to think about it ahead of time. And then it's like a skills and drills. So I think that they do this in healthcare. Like when there's an emergency situation, they have got skills and drills. This is what we do. This is what we do. This is what we do in this order. And so when there is a big, difficult situation, like an emergency situation, people don't have to use those parts of your brain to decide everything. They just know X, Y, then Z. That's what we do. So you're going to do that too. You're going to think about it before the event, and then you're going to say, if a brain blank happens in this scenario, then I'm going to what? The other thing that I want you to decide before the event is how you're going to speak to yourself afterwards if that thing occurs. So what many of us will do, and I've talked about this on the podcast millions of times in loads of different ways, is give ourselves a hard time afterwards because this thing happened. Oh God, I'm such an idiot. Like I lost my place. What the hell? This is so bad. Like I'm not cut out for this, blah, blah, blah. And what you're doing, as I just said, is inadvertently raising the stakes. And I think making it more likely that it will happen next time. You're telling your brain, like, this situation is very bad. And therefore, it'll give you like a heightened sense of stress the next time, which is not really what you want if you're trying to go for a less blank brain. If you're trying to keep an engaged brain, more stress is not what you need. So I want you to decide ahead of time, how am I going to handle myself afterwards if this does occur? And I'm going to suggest, like I always do, that you just handle yourself, or you at least try to, in a way that you would want somebody else to handle you if you had a brain blank moment. So let's say your boss is there in that meeting where you're, giving your update and your brain goes blank. And then you manage to recompose yourself and carry on. Good for you. But afterwards, what do you want your boss to say? You say, oh God, I had that brain blank right in the middle of it. Do you want your boss to say, yeah, you're right. You're such an idiot. Better make sure that that doesn't happen next time. You're so embarrassing. No, of course you don't want your boss to say that. Unless you're a sadist. You probably want your boss to say, yeah, do you know what? It happens. It's happened to me. And I think you did really well in carrying on and in giving your information, even though you were contending with that. So, like, well done, you. I think that's how I would want my boss to handle it. So, if you would want your boss to handle it like that, then you better make sure you're handling it like that for yourself. And you will get the double benefit of not feeling as bad afterwards, but also your brain is going to remember that. It's going to remember how you were handled. And if you were handled kindly and calmly and you were encouraged and you were supported, you're going to lower the stakes and the stress for next time, probably making it less likely that the brain blank will occur. Brain bank? What's a brain blank? I will not go off on that tangent now, but I will think about that later. Brain blank, making it less likely that that brain blank will occur. So that's what I want you to do before the event. But what do you do in the moment? So you get to decide. So you decided before, like, what do you do in the moment? If X happens, then I'm going to do Y. I want you in the moment to, as far as you can, just enact your plan. But some things that I've found helpful, in case this is helpful to you in creating your plan of what you're going to do, of what you want to do, is I pause, I take a breath, and then I go again. And I make sure that I'm not like trash talking myself in my brain for the fact that it's happened. And if I need a little bit of encouragement, I'm probably going to give that to myself too. So in that situation where there were those 6 people looking at me, I actually, like, I can see myself doing it. I don't know I don't care what they thought, but I don't think they probably thought anything apart from she's taking a moment. I looked down to one side. I'm doing that now, so the sound might change. I looked down to one side. I actually gave myself, it felt like a long time. It probably wasn't, but it did feel like quite a good few seconds, which felt like an age. And then I took a nice deep breath in. And as I breathed out, I relaxed my shoulders and my tummy. And then I looked up. I carried on. So use that if it helps you. And it might help you to actually look away or to look down. Take a nice breath. Reset your shoulders if you can. And go again. But you get to decide what would be most helpful for you. What do you think that pause would be like, where you're going to slow yourself down? Because I think if you're in that brain blank moment and you're kind of trying to force yourself to start again really, really quickly, I think that could cause you more stress. So, and think about pausing. What's appropriate in that setting? So it could be that it's appropriate for you to just pick up some water and maybe just take a sip. Maybe it's that you can take a, deep breath. And maybe, like you might even say, oh, my brain's just gone blank. Maybe there's even a situation where you feel so offline, you might just say, do you know what? I just need 30 seconds. Talk amongst yourselves. People will do it to allow you to come back online and get the result you want, which is give your information or carry on with your presentation or whatever. So maybe find a way of pausing and then breathing. So they recommend diaphragmatic. I don't know if I'm saying that right, breathing, but that's like breathing from your diaphragm, which is the muscle underneath your lungs, which makes your lungs go up and down. So when we're panicky, when we're stressed, we can tend to breathe kind of like that, right? Fast and up in the top of our chest. But when we're very relaxed, our breathing goes a lot further down towards our diaphragm. So kind of forcing that breath for a minute, or even just one breath, can be helpful. And then what's your reset? So you restart. And you might even say, okay, I'm going to take that from the top, or I'm going to take that from the summary. Now, I'm thinking about it now, actually. When I had my brain blank moment this week, the guy who was asking me questions, he was great, actually. He was very understanding. And he said, why don't you just take that from the summary? And now I could have done that myself, right? I could have said, I'm going to take it from the summary. And everyone would have been like, fine, great. So let's take it from the summary right now. Brain blanks happen. They're a normal part of human life. And they're a normal part of my work life. So maybe they're a normal part of yours too. Anything you can do to decrease the pressure on yourself is good. anything that you might inadvertently be doing, which is going to increase the pressure, is probably going to make it harder. So think about the things that we've discussed in this episode, how you can decide ahead of time how you want to handle it, and how you can take the pressure off. All right. I hope that was helpful. And again, we have a free masterclass coming up on speaking up. So if this episode resonated with you, that class might be useful for you too. So go along to the show notes, click the link, and you can book in a few clicks and join us in class. All right. I will see you next week.